Well, Scott Sauls, yeah, I'm really grateful just for spending some time with me and giving some time to our church and our community. Um, we were talking offline a little bit, but From Strength to Weakness is one of my favorite books that you've written. But you also just came out with a book called The Gentle Answer, which I guess it just comes out tomorrow. But by the time everyone listens to this, it'll be out. And that's really kind of what I've seen of you, as a kind of gentleness and a kind of a winsomeness that is persuasive. I'm sure you've probably changed my mind on a few things, just even following your preaching and books. And so that's coming out. Can you just give us a little bit? I mean, your books have been an important part of the story of a lot of our people. So just maybe even just give us a little bit of a taste of what that book is meant to be.
Yeah, so this one, the subtitle probably describes the book even better than the title does. It's a gentle answer, our, quote, secret weapon, end quote, in a world of us against them. And without having any idea what the world would be going through right now, or especially our world in, the cities around the United States and North America, I can easily say it's by far the most timely book I've ever written without intending for it to be a most timely book. But yeah, it's less about, kind of the how-tos and pro tips for sort of third way cultural engagement around contested issues. That's really what my first book, Jesus Outside the Lines, was aimed at, was sort of almost like a field guide with a lot of anecdotes about, how to talk about sexuality and race and gender and, other things. This one is as much or more about the cultivation of the heart. First and foremost, in the first section of the book, has to do with what it might look like to turn our receptors on to the gentleness of Christ for us, the one who's meek and humble in heart, and who invites rest to our souls because his yoke is easy and his burden is light. And the three chapters in that section are how he befriends the sinner in us. He turns down our hostility by not responding to our hostility with more hostility, but instead he demonstrates his own love, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And the second one is how he reforms the Pharisee in us, how he wants to chip away at the contempt that we feel in our hearts toward those that we might call the other. And then third, how he disarms the cynic in us, that part of us that's just prone to be cynical. And then the last 5 chapters is really a picture or a portrait of what I'm arguing that the Spirit's fruit of gentleness looks like. And it's actually going to probably alarm some people who pick up the book and read it, what these chapters are about, because it doesn't sound like our sort of stereotypical westernized understanding of gentleness, which we often equate with maybe wimpiness. And really what true biblical gentleness is pretty fierce and gutsy. It involves growing thicker skin, doing anger well, receiving criticism graciously, forgiving all the way, and blessing even our own betrayers. And so it's just not really for the faint of heart, but it's an effort to try to help mainly Christians to engage the environment that we're in a way that makes things better instead of worse. And it's sort of built on the Proverbs 15:1, a gentle answer turns away wrath. And I think Christians are the only community in the world that we have that has a resource that provides the fuel for character change and the fuel for making us non-defensive when under attack, even though we may need to be prophetic, and yet we don't retaliate as the world does, sort of the peaceful resistance that King, brought to the civil rights movement, I think is a really good case study for the whole church today. What is peaceful resistance to a hostile culture look like? That's really what the book's geared toward. So, longer introduction than you asked for, but
no, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for your work. Well, in our community, we're talking about the intimacy of Jesus. And the reason why we're in a sort of we talked about this offline, we're in a longer season here in New York in a pandemic where our lives are hidden. We're losing a lot. A lot of our folks are losing income. A lot of us are losing comforts and freedoms, but we also see this season as in a season of loss, there's a potential of fullness. With Christ, we have less of a performative spirituality and more of a hidden life with God. And so I'd love just to hear from you. A gentle answer seems to be very characteristic of what I've experienced of you. And where does that come from? Where did you go from knowing about God to intimacy with Jesus? What did that look like in your own story?
Man, I want the honest answer to that, John. I still feel like, I'm 52 years old. I've been a Christian for 37 of those years-ish, maybe a little less than 37. And I still feel like I'm just getting started. I feel, I struggle to, experience what you're describing. At least I struggle to be aware of what might be my experience of what Christ is doing in and around me. I don't see myself as a very gentle person. I don't see myself as a very persuasive person, and that might be because I'm a 4 on the Enneagram. The 4 is the one who's always doubting themselves. You always feel like you're the most annoying person in the room and in the conversation, and so that's kind of the shadow side of my wiring. But yeah, I don't feel like what you're describing necessarily. And yet I deeply believe in these just wonderful attributes of Jesus. And I'm deeply compelled when I see them fleshed out in human lives. There's just nothing more compelling to me than a kind-hearted person in a hostile environment. I wonder if that's why Mr. Rogers is gaining popularity again, with the documentary and then the Hollywood film on his life being so popular. I wonder if that says something about where the hearts of people are these days in a culture of outrage and cancel culture, where all of a sudden Mr. Rogers is so compelling again to so many people.
Yeah. It was interesting. We did an interview just a few minutes ago with Scotty Smith, and he describes
who's Scotty Smith?
Pastor out there in Nashville.
Yeah, one of my longtime mentors.
Yeah, I know you're close with him.
Good man.
And he described, and his story, but describes the awakening of grace and intimacy with him really wasn't until he was 50. And that had a big shift after a season of burnout. And, he'd been a faithful gospel preaching pastor for so long, and but would describe a kind of awakening later in life. And I think that was just so encouraging to me, one, just from me personally, but I know from our own community we have folks here who want to come and make it in New York, and they have these dreams, and then they're 29 and they only see so many rungs left on the ladder. They haven't done what they thought they could. They haven't gotten, by the time you're 30 in some industries, you're toast. And so just this idea of experiencing a whole life with Christ seems sometimes even out of reach by the time they're 30. And so you as as a 52-year-old and Scotty as a 70-year-old saying it wasn't until I was 50 until I
Sounds
really
really old if you're from New York City. Really
What,
old, unless you're a native.
how would you encourage those of us who feel like, oh man, I'm just now maybe beginning to experience intimacy, or maybe now I'm interested in it. I've just wasted so much of my life. How would you encourage them?
Listen to everything John Starke says about these things. Read everything John Starke's written about these things. Truly, thank you for your work on prayer and spiritual formation. It's inspiring and contagious. Yeah, I mean, I think that we make spiritual formation, our expectations of it are that it would be more spectacular than it's meant to be. You think about how the best things in life are formed, and they're all formed through sweat and toil and struggle and mundaneness, and what Eugene Peterson called, and what Nietzsche called before Eugene Peterson called it, a long obedience in the same direction. Where we get up every single day and we do the things that lead to health, whether we feel like it or not. It makes absolute sense to us when we apply that to diet, when we apply it to physical fitness and exercise. It makes absolute sense to us when we apply it to getting enough sleep, to excelling in a career path, that, you got to get your education in this way and in this kind of place, and you got to study these things, and you've got to be mentored by these kinds of people, and you got to adopt this rhythm of life. Your Juilliard musicians would tell you that for every hour they spend on a stage, if they ever get to the stage, they spend probably 40 hours practicing scales and working on their craft. And somehow I think, especially in the American way, we think that spiritual life is supposed to be different. Like, it's supposed to come through it to us like a meal out of the microwave, instead of something slow cooked that we have to wait for, and that we have to be patient with. And so I think the strategies today are as old as time. I think people in urban centers should be doing the same things that people who live on farms are doing. And that is to get quiet, to get low, to be fully present with Jesus Christ every single day, whatever that looks like for you and your personality and your rhythm, and to be fully present with a local church every single week of your life. Unless you're sick, unless you're, contagious COVID or something like that, unless you're elderly and immobilized and can't get there, be there every single week. If you're on vacation and your church has an online service, dial in, no matter where you are. If your church doesn't have an online service, find one wherever you are and worship with those people every single Sunday of your life. So do those two things, and you're off to the races, man. And let those two things form you. Listen carefully to those two things, and allow them to form how you believe, allow them to form how you structure the way you live your days, and you're going to be fine. And those two things are going to pull you into two other things, community and mission. We're not meant to follow Christ in isolation. We're not meant to be Christians by ourselves. There really is no concept of the personal relationship with Christ in the Bible. Don't hear me wrong there. You have to have your own faith. You're justified by your faith and not by somebody else's. The faith that God gives you uniquely and not somebody else's. But you live your life before Christ in community. It's remarkable how the percentage of the second person references in the New Testament, how plural those references are. They're hardly ever singular. They're always speaking to a community and to a group, or when Jesus is speaking, it's always a community or a group, not individuals. Very rare. And then the second piece is mission. That our faith is completed as we go out and share it. You know, like C.S. Lewis said, our enjoyment in something, our fulfillment in something will never be complete until we've had an opportunity to evangelize it.
Yeah.
We do that with our favorite restaurants. We do that with, you know, whatever experiences we love to share, like Absolute Bagel on the Upper West Side. I still tell people that's the most amazing bagel in the world. And I can't help but tell people that. And you know, if my faith is robust, then it's going to flow off my tongue naturally, and it's going to complete things. And so yeah. Fully present with Jesus, fully present with the church. That's your starting point, and home and mission after that.
And those two things are ordinary, but yet it seems like we want to find some technique or some new whatever, something. What at some point, did you just get tired of looking for new techniques, or did they just not work, or what?
C.S. Lewis wrote scathingly about spirituality by technique. Check out Mere Christianity on that one. Yeah, we're not machines. And here's the thing too. Having been in you know, the urban center that is New York City, and having lived the Manhattan life, you know, it's very unique there, and in many ways it's not. It's just human. It's a human way to be, to want to master things. It's just the thing about New York City is, like, people who are able to live there, typically the system is supporting you, because you qualify for the system to support you to be there, which is one of the great things about New York, is how generous New York tends to be toward the least of these, and you know, at least in many ways. But the other reason why you're there is that you crushed it in college, or you've crushed it in the earlier years of your career, and you've somehow gotten to one of the greatest cities in the world, you know, about which it's been said, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And so you're used to living under the illusion that you're in control. And when you start to apply that to things that require another entity, another person in the mix that doesn't report to you, like God or like friends. Your friends don't report to you. God doesn't report to you. That's where it gets, you know, more complicated, because you realize it's more of a give and take. It's not something that, well, if I just apply these principles and apply my education to this, then I'm gonna crush it. You know, Jesus says the true masters of divinity are the ones who become like children again, and are the ones who lose their lives in order to find them, and are the ones who are humble. You know, the ones who are exalted are the ones who humble themselves, and the ones who are humbled are the ones who exalt themselves. And so, you know, it's what Keller, you know, calls the upside down kingdom. I don't know if that originates with Tim, but you know, the notion of how God has this sort of upside down way of doing things, when in fact the reality is we're upside down, and spiritual formation is figuring out what it means to live right side up, you know, as a subject of God's kingdom and as a child in God's family.
Yeah. Oh, well, lastly then, if you have some people who are just beginning to step into, okay, I want to pursue a life of intimacy or closeness with God, you've probably already said it, but how would you practically just help them get started? What are some places to begin? What's some starting points for some of us, especially if it's difficult to maybe get started, I guess?
Yeah, starting points, you know, again, the church every Sunday thing, that's easy. Rearrange your schedule, and if you think you're too busy, look, you're not too busy to show up at work at 6 a.m. and to leave at 9 p.m. So you're not too busy. You just don't have the priorities that say, you know, this hour and a half is the most important hour and a half of my entire week. Organize your life around your worship, not your worship around the rest of your life. Demonstrate in the rhythm of your life that the local church is the most important moment of your entire week, week in and week out. Because it is, whether you feel like it is or not, it is, because God says it is. And God's built you to order your life around being before his face with the people of God. And I would say, get into smaller, community conversations about the things of God. Maybe that's one other person, maybe that's 10 other people, whatever can fit in your apartment. And then that daily thing, I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up, is I don't even know where to start with the Bible. There's some really great resources out there. Jen Wilkin has written a book that I think is improperly titled. It's called Women of the Word, but I think, with all due respect to whoever gave it the title, I think it's great for men. I think it's great for teenagers. I think it's great for kids. I think that's a great starting point, is just read what Jen Wilkin says about how to have a relationship with the Bible. And good. Women of the Word, whether you're a guy, whether you're a man or a woman, read that book. Gordon Fee has written one about how to read the Bible for all it's worth. There are resources out there. Your pastors will, point you to the resources, but there are resources that can give you sort of a crash course in how to understand the Bible and its different, genres, and how to read it, how to internalize it, how to process it. Keller's written some really good white papers on, Lectio Divina, and just how to take a piece of scripture and eat it, eat it with your soul, and digest it, and then express energy from what you've taken in. Lectio Divina, like there are great white papers on that kind of stuff. And I'm sure the Sojourn Network has some great resources there too, right? Yeah. And be nice to people, being kind is a good spiritually formative process as well. It's contagious.